I sold these two Xboxes, and when the customers received them, they told me they didn't work. So I told them to send them back so we can see what I did wrong. Usually it's me inspecting consoles to see what other people did wrong, so it should be interesting to put myself under the microscope and figure out my mistakes. For this Xbox One X, it's the Robot Wide Edition, and the buyer said that when he plays intensive games like Red Dead Redemption 2, it'll heat up and actually overheat. So I'm getting that game installed right now. It's taking forever because I have really slow internet. Let's take a look at the Xbox Series X and see what happened with this one. So this Xbox Series X is one that I made a video on, and I think it's the one where it had a really busted up case. So I put it into a new case, but when the customer got it, he said that the HDMI wouldn't connect correctly. And just looking at the HDMI port, that doesn't look great. I'm not sure how we let this get out the door, but I'm gonna get this taken apart and let's inspect this port and see what's going on there. The other interesting thing about this is the buyer said they were going to take it to Geek Squad to see what Geek Squad said about it. I don't know if they actually did, but I think they probably did because I was looking at this label. It looks like maybe they like heated it up so they could peel it back. I'm not really sure though. That's the only thing I can think of that would make these shiny spots right here is this label getting really warm. I'm not sure why they went through all the trouble of doing that though when the label looks pretty terrible and the plastic is a little bit damaged. I don't know whether the buyer actually took it there or not though. They just said that's something they were thinking about doing. So maybe this isn't from them. Either way, let's get this back cover off and get the guts out of it and have a look at that port. Yep, I remember this little bit of damage right here on the board. There's a little damage over here too. I remember those two from that video I made. I don't remember the port being this damaged. It is possible that when the buyer got it, maybe they tried to plug the HDMI port in and maybe bent this a little bit more than it was or something. I feel like if I would have noticed it being this bad, I would have replaced it, but I do miss things too, so maybe not. Either way, we gotta get this thing the rest of the way apart, and then we can inspect it further. Now before we go any further on disassembly, let's actually plug this in and turn it on and see if we get a signal on the TV through this HDMI port. And also, let's just make sure the thing works. You never know, sometimes shippers are pretty rough on these things. Power, HDMI. Okay, fan is spinning, it's turning on, and we get nothing. Yep, nothing at all on the TV. So it does turn on fully, so we definitely have a problem on this HDMI system. Now that does make me wonder a little bit because I know before we shipped it out, we tested to make sure the HDMI worked. So I'm not really sure what would be going on to make it not work at all. We wouldn't have shipped something out that didn't work at all. Sometimes we do miss things, but that's something we tested very specifically, both in the video I made and then also again before we shipped it out. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Ah, yes, I remember this one. This connector was kind of broken off the board right here, so I put some conformal coating on there to help attach it to the board. Looks like it's still on there pretty good. So this is a little worrisome, unless I'm missing something here. There's no clamp here. That seems to be a problem. Also, I was just thinking on this, actually, there's no thermal paste here or here either. Is the thermal paste on the other side? Let's find out. Feels like there is. Okay, there is thermal paste there, thermal pads there. Okay, so that's normal at least. But why is there no clamp? I would feel really dumb if I didn't put the clamp back in here. Okay, let's go to the video and see if I show putting the clamp in, and also see how damaged this HDMI port is. Okay, I pulled up the video. $150 for a destroyed Xbox Series X. That's the video that we're working with. Okay, so it's a little too far. Let's go back here. Okay, I'm installing the perfect amount of thermal paste, of course. There we go. Okay, this is where, okay, the clamp is going on. So I do install the clamp on this. So somebody must have taken this thing apart and forgot to put the clamp back on. That would have been embarrassing if it was me, but I'm pretty sure this video clearly shows me putting the clamp back on. So whoever took it apart didn't put the clamp back on. But let's check this video to see how the HDMI port looked. Okay, this shows it. It doesn't show it really well. I can't say for sure that the HDMI port is perfect in this, but I mean, it looks pretty good. Let's see if there's any other views of it. Okay, will it start up? Let's go back. There. Also not the best view, but the HDMI port, it doesn't look too bad. Let's compare. So this is now, that was then. I mean, we can't say 100% for sure that the HDMI port was not damaged in the video. But obviously it is now, and whether it was then or not, the customer received it and it didn't work. So I'm just gonna replace this HDMI port and then just send it back at no charge, just because I can't prove that it's not something that I missed. And clearly when the customer got it, it didn't work. I think we can prove that I'm not the one that forgot to put the clamp on though. I'm so glad. That would have been very embarrassing for me. So let's get this HDMI port replaced and then we'll make sure and put a clamp back on. So in order to replace this HDMI port, I'm gonna use a hot air soldering station, and what I'm gonna do is heat it from the bottom. So my goal is to melt the solder on the 4 mounting pins, and then also melt the solder on the 19 small pins on the other side of the board, and that will enable the port to just drop down. And then I will keep the hot air on the board while I install the new port, and then once the new port is up inside the holes, I'll remove the heat and let the solder solidify, and the job will be done. Now, as I am heating this board, I do use my hot air wand to heat the board in a further area than just the little localized area that I'm heating. That just helps to make sure the board doesn't delaminate. It probably won't, because Xbox boards are very large as far as the how much heat they soak up. So using this much heat in a small area probably won't cause a problem, but I do just like to make sure, because that has happened before. It happened to me a long time ago, and it can ruin the board, so just like to be careful. And I'm just kind of tracing a pattern where the solder is. So the 4 mounting holes, and then back here along the back is where the 19 small pins are on the other side. So just got to make sure that all gets plenty hot so it can melt the solder and this port can drop out. And I do use my tweezers sometimes just to see if the solder is melting. And it definitely is, so it should be dropping out here pretty soon. Definitely don't want to put any pressure on it to come out, because that's how pads are ripped. So just going to be patient here and let it drop out when it's ready. There we go. And we got it. Now we'll keep the heat here, get our new port, and install it up in the holes. Oh, didn't do a good job of waiting till the solder was solidified. I'll put a little extra solder down in the holes. Nice fresh solder. All right, now let's flip it over and have a look at it. So here we are under the microscope. The pins look great. They're lined up perfectly. I'm gonna go through and add some solder just to make sure we got really good strong joints. So first we need to flux it up. Then I'm just gonna come in with my small soldering iron and solder each of these pins on just to make sure they have a really good connection here. Don't need too much flux because it can get up in the port and cause connection issues. So you can see I've got a bridge here. Not a big deal, but I'm trying to take some solder from that and distribute on some of the other pins. And then once my iron has not as much solder on it, then I come through and grab some more. Do the same thing a few times. And if that doesn't work, I can come in with some solder wick, but a lot of times that'll work. Still got a little bit of a bridge there. There we go. And that got that taken care of. Now those pins are all soldered on nice and solidly. Let's get this cleaned up, inspect it one more time, then we can get it back together. That looks great. Each of these pins are soldered on nice and solidly, as you can see. So let's get this thing back together. Of course, we need to add a little bit of thermal paste to make sure we have the perfect amount. Normally, there we go. Normally, I would say you need to clean off all the thermal paste. But since I'm the one that had this apart not too long ago, I know how much I put on. I know that it's fresh thermal paste. I'm not worried about that. I'm adding a little bit just to make sure that it will fully spread through and make sure that there's no air bubbles or anything like that once we put it on and clamp it down. I'm honestly kind of surprised that this Xbox worked and turned on at all, since the clamp wasn't even installed on this thing. There we go. Now as this presses down, it's going to spread that thermal paste all nicely throughout the APU. Okay, now let's install the X clamp. And this is video proof that I did install it, just in case, this thing comes back again. I don't think it will. Okay, clamp is installed. We've all verified that. Now we need to put some thermal paste here. And they use kind of like a viscous thermal putty. So I'm going to take it from a donor console, since I've got some of these laying around. Just gonna kind of scrape it up from here. And this doesn't have to lay on here perfectly. It's similar to the other thermal paste. It'll kind of spread once we put these, once I put this piece on here. Okay. Now we need to not forget this guy, which goes right there. Then this, right here. All right, and there we go. Okay, good so far. Now I'm just gonna get the rest of this thing put back together, then we can install it into the case, and then see if it'll turn on and if it'll show an HDMI signal after that. All right, and now with all the screws in there, we can bring the case over, get this thing installed into the case. Just like that. Got to push it in there like that and then push it that way. There we go. Now we can get the cables installed. These ones you got to be careful to line them up correctly. And there's a locking tab we push down. And make sure and tape it down right here. And similar with this guy. Just push it in and it'll lock itself. There we go. And now the fan. After we get the carpet fuzz off. And disk drive. Oh, you can see this is the marking on the disk drive, just showing just another indication that this is the Xbox from that $150 Xbox video I did. There. And then this guy goes on. Okay. Now just a bunch more screws in the back cover, and then we'll be ready to test. All right, and the back cover goes on. There we go. One screw here. And one screw here. Screw cover. Now we can test it and see if it works after all that work. HDMI cable, power cable. All right, and power. Make sure it turns on. Good there. Okay, I hear the fan, good. And black screen, that's better than not. And my TV is restarting. And there we go. So this HDMI port is working great. Even when I wiggle the cable, no issues at all. Got a nice clear picture. I'm still not sure how bad the HDMI port is when I sent it out. We did test it, it did work. And then when the customer got it, they said it didn't work. So I'm actually not sure how much of this was my fault, but ultimately they got it and it just didn't work. Now that we have the Series X fixed, let's turn our attention to the Xbox One X. And of course, it's got a lot of downloading left to go. We're at about 47%, so I'm gonna go eat some lunch and come back and hopefully we'll be ready to go. So we have the game finally installed. I can already hear the fan kind of like ramping up a little bit higher than it should, I feel like. But let's start this game and see what the fan does and see if the thing overheats. Oh yeah, it's getting louder already. It's putting out a lot of air and it actually doesn't feel that hot. Oh. Did it just turn itself off? Keep the console cool. Okay, so it thinks that it doesn't have proper ventilation. Okay, I think all we can do now is take it apart and see what's going on the inside. This is an interesting one. I know before we shipped this out, we would have tested a game in it. And I know it wasn't overheating like this before we sent it, but also we don't test them for long periods of time, generally speaking. And sometimes we don't test really graphically intense games because in order to test those, you have to install them, which takes a very long time. So I'm not sure what to expect of this one. We have all the screws. All the screws look to be installed. I was thinking maybe it was missing the clamp or clamp screws or something, but those are installed. Okay, let's check the fan, and under the fan itself seems fine. I don't expect that the fan's a problem. I think something is telling the fan to turn on more. The heatsink is definitely warm. Yeah, that's still pretty warm actually. Not sure what to think about that. Okay, we got the thermal pad for the south bridge. That's there. The X clamp is installed and is nice and tight. So no worries there. Okay, with the X clamp removed, let's take a look at this thing and see if we can figure out why it's getting so hot. We have thermal paste installed. All of the thermal pads look good. Oh boy, I don't know about this one. Everything here looks good. So I think it probably is overheating, but for some reason, it's not moving the heat away from the chip like it should. I wonder if we have like maybe a faulty vapor chamber. I don't see any damage to it or anything, but I don't know. I don't really see anywhere else to go. Just seems so weird. You'd think there'd be some damage somewhere if it was faulty. Well, I'm going to inspect this a little bit closer and see if I see anything. If I don't see anything else, I think I'm going to replace this vapor chamber and heatsink and then put it back together. I'm just not seeing anything obvious here, which is really strange with overheating issues. Usually with an overheating issue, the problem is very obvious, but in this case, it's definitely not. This is one of the only few replacement parts, replacement heat sinks I have left for these. This one actually looks in better condition, but I know for sure this one works and cools, so I'm going to use this one. I've already reformed these little thermal pads just to make sure they have really good contact with these memory chips over here. Now we need to clean up this thermal paste, and we'll put new thermal paste in just to make sure that's not an issue. I already know it's not. This thermal paste is fine. It's been spread nicely over it and it's making good contact, so I don't have any worries there. But since we're here, might as well make sure it has the perfect amount, right? I am a little bit worried on this one because if none of what we do helps, that means it's probably an issue with the APU. These don't have like external thermal sensors or temperature sensors or anything. So the temperature sensor is built right into the chip somewhere. So if none of this works and it still overheats, it's likely a problem with the chip. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get the perfect amount of thermal paste applied, and then we can start getting this thing back together. And there we go. Now it's for sure gonna work. Okay, we'll set this one to the side and put this one in and start getting this thing reassembled. There we go. Now we can see all of these thermal pads along here are getting all squished out now. That's going to ensure that there's really good contact there once we get this clamp on. I am also going to use a replacement clamp. The other one seemed fine, but just want to make sure we're covering all our bases here. Okay. That all looks good so far. This thermal pad, while not in amazing condition, it's going to be just fine. So now we can put this right back in here. Okay, now we can just start installing the pieces, then get this thing tested out. I don't think the fan is an issue. I'm not going to replace the fan because the fan was for sure working. So we heard it get loud, we heard it spinning and moving air, so I don't think the fan's an issue. So we're going to reuse this fan. Power cable's plugged in, HDMI is plugged in, controller's plugged in. Let's see if it turns on. Great news so far. So I'm gonna get this game pulled up and we'll see if this thing's gonna overheat. Come on. So we're getting the same error that happened before, except for now, the fan is barely spinning. So I feel like the console isn't even telling the fan to spin up like it was before. So this tells me, as far as I can tell, it's a problem on the motherboard of this console. Luckily we can replace that, or we can place this white shell on another Xbox One X, because this is kind of a less common version. So these do go for a little bit more. Now for this one, I did buy it back from the person I sold it to, simply because I wasn't sure what was wrong, and that's what they chose that they would like to do. Instead of having me try to fix it, they just wanted a refund and to send it back to me. So this one I own now, and I can either replace that board or place this shell on a different console. So unfortunately, we are 1 out of 2 today. Not too bad. This one was a good, easy fix. This one, I just don't know what's going on other than probably the APU. If you want to see the first video I did on this Series X, where I paid $150 for it, but it was in really bad condition, I'll leave that video up on your screen now so you can come hang out with me over there and see what all I had to do to this to get it working. Thanks so much for watching today, and I hope you have a good one.